I've been called a cynical optimist. They're on either side. They're cheering him on. He's running through and high-fiving it. And I remember I took a photo of him running through that, and I thought, this is so preposterous. I would never want anybody to do this for me. Their lives were on the line. And I found myself really moved. I like to get into the weeds on stuff. If I have time today, I'm going to go to the courthouse and pull documents. I prefer to be additive in very small ways in my life. I hate the idea of having a negative impact. Can I read the story before it's published? I don't know who told you that that's okay. And some people will say, like, some people do that. I want you to ask for their names, who is doing that. And I hope it's not true. If you're not getting into journalism to chase difficult stories, then I feel like you're doing it wrong. And if you have that, then you'll do well.
For 2 decades, I've helped brands earn credibility through PR. Now I'm turning the mic on the storytellers themselves. I'm Melissa DiGianfilippo, founder and CEO of Proof Publicity, and this is Off Deadline, the real stories of reporters, hosts, and media insiders beyond the byline. Welcome to Off Deadline. I'm Melissa DiGianfilippo, and my guest today is Paul Thompson. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. Paul Thompson is the managing editor of the Phoenix Business Journal, where he leads the newsroom's day-to-day coverage of business across the valley. With more than 15 years in journalism, Paul has previously worked as a business journalist in Austin and as a beat reporter in Kansas City, where he grew up a diehard Chiefs and Royals fan. His leadership and passion for storytelling help shape how Arizona's business community gets its news. And that's true. You're doing a great job.
I love to hear it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So first, we kind of just talked about it. You're from Kansas City. You're a diehard Chiefs fan. How do you really feel about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce?
I feel weirdly defensive, for her. But hopefully, her fans appreciate that. I guess she's one of us now, so I feel like
you're welcoming,
protective of her, and I want to, I want to keep her in the fold, and I don't want people attacking her, and of course, by proxy, Travis Kelce, who's one of the most beloved Chiefs players of all time. So totally. I see it. It seems real. Yeah. I like them together.
Good.
I'm in.
Okay, well, now we'll get into the real stuff.
I thought we were good. That's it, right?
I always like to start with the backstory.
Sure.
Did you wake up one day when you were, 10 years old and be like, I'm going to be a journalist? Or what was that moment for you, and what was that first job?
There's always a little bit of an evolution. I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I was religious about reading the sports page and the columnists I would go to every week, and I always wanted to be that. I wanted to be a columnist. I wanted to be a sports columnist. Yeah. But, I worked my first job was actually at Kansas City Star working in their agate page, which it was like an hourly job I did in my last year of school.
Nice.
Incidentally enough, I was a creative writing and English major, so I didn't know really what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But I kind of got an experience in the sort of newsroom vibe. Once I graduated, it was a bad time in journalism, and right around the recession. And I ended up taking a role at a community newspaper just outside of Kansas City proper in Grandview, Missouri.
Okay.
And I spent a few years there, did high school sports reporting. I covered school boards. It was my sort of introduction into proper news reporting, and it was kind of trial by fire.
Yeah, right? Because it's a big change from, just pulling some sports stats. You're like going in and probably going to city council meetings and, all the things that it's all brand new.
Yeah, it was. Normal. Yeah, I had a feeling I could do it, but you're a little scared too because you're not really sure. And I ended up just loving it. The connections you make with people. I was fortunate to have an editor that I really liked and that was respectful of me and appreciated me and pretty much never said no to any of my crazy ideas and things like that. So it was a small town vibe, but there's a lot of compelling stories, and I learned a lot about how to tell them. Yeah,
that's great. And so you got to Phoenix because you were assistant managing editor of the Austin Business Journal, right? Yeah. And I know the Business Journal Network has a great way of probably moving their best reporters around, honestly, because I see it happen a lot. Mm-hmm. So you came to Phoenix. What year was it?
2023.
Okay.
So I've just got my second year.
Awesome. And what do you think?
So far, so good. I'm happy. It's a really great team. The reporters are strong. I think the culture is really strong there, and I hope I'm additive to that. But we do an awesome job of scooping stories, and our newsroom will, if they watch this, will probably roll their eyes. Maybe they'll laugh a little bit. But I always say, if there's a difficult story to be told, if it sounds complicated or harrowing in any way, like we should be racing towards it. Because if we're not doing it, then who is? So
totally.
I think that's the expectation of our readers, which is, a heavy load to bear, but also like it's a great privilege. So we love doing it. And I think, we want to go after difficult stories and talk to a lot of people and just be really thoughtful about our reporting.
Awesome. I think you guys do a great job. I obviously do PR. I have a lot of clients and they all own businesses or they're part of a business. Mm-hmm. And so they get covered all the time in the Business Journal, and it really is I hear from people, the most followed publication, I think, in the Valley, in the business community. I think there's other outlets that do it great too. I think the Republic's awesome, but you guys have done a really good job of being selective enough, curating really great stories. You break news a lot. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I think that's all we're trying to strive for. And it means a lot to us that, when you hear people out in the community say, I go to you for all my business news. And that does actually happen. You'd be surprised. So, people don't necessarily know who I am, but they'll send me emails and, you hear through the grapevine about the reporters that they follow regularly and the storylines that they follow. And it's just, really heartening.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, we're going to go a little deep into you today.
All right.
So first, what assignment forced you the furthest out of your comfort zone?
There's a few. I thought about this a lot because, I just sort of early on in my career, I was taking a lot of, I worked in a downtown area of Kansas City where there was a lot of crime, and there were stories where I think at one point I went to like 3 murder scenes in 3 straight days, and that's really difficult. So, sort of tangential to that is some of the stuff where there's areas of gray. I mean, there was a story I wrote about it was a young kid who was in his teens who was killed at an intersection, and it seemed very senseless. What you find out over the course of our reporting was that he was also like a notorious spray tagger, like spray paint tagger, who had been like just causing all sorts of problems in the community, and it just kind of felt like there was this kind of strange story to tell about people who knew him as like a very lovable guy who was like an excellent skateboarder and like a really bright light. And then without realizing it, he was also sort of like, in a way, I mean, this is probably hyperbolic, but like terrorizing the community because he's like spraying over murals. And I just getting to know a little bit about who this kid was and kind of the tragedy of his circumstances was and talking to people who loved him, and knowing that he was also a person that caused a lot of consternation.
Yeah, like how do you tell that whole story? That has to be hard.
Yeah, that's one example.
In a sensitive way, too.
Yeah, I think so. And you had to be really thoughtful about it. And, and I thought we did a pretty good job at the time of covering that storyline because he was somebody that we wrote about. Like I think his name was Screw was his tagging name.
Yep.
And he was very infamous. And so talking to folks that I think people actually treated it with a lot of respect and a lot of heart, but it's one of those stories where it's difficult to talk to people who are going through a tragedy and dealing with something difficult, especially when the circumstances are so tragic at the end.
Yeah, so it's like asking those tough questions can't feel good, but it's also your job.
And I tell, I always am looking for that when we're going out to hire reporters, because I do think if you can go to those crime scenes, if you can ask questions to people that are going through heartache and trauma, one of the most difficult things any reporter will ever have to do. If you can do that, or if you've done that before, I have all the confidence in the world, if like your attitude's right, that you'll be able to like talk to a CEO and ask a powerful person who's got influence or who's got money or who employs hundreds or thousands of people. You can handle those kind of questions at a crime scene. I do think I have a lot of faith in reporters' ability to overcome any sort of caution you might have when you're asking difficult questions of really powerful folks.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't really think about that being a training ground for being put in those situations when like you have to ask powerful people true questions that they don't want to answer always, or you're telling them information about them because it's public records, and you're going to publish it, and that is it's your job, but it's hard. So that's a great analogy that like those really rough moments train you to do that.
Yeah, and I've seen plenty of examples of reporters, and I don't think it's a prerequisite or anything like that, but it's just if you can handle a really difficult situation like that, it can kind of seem like light work, I think, sometimes. Yeah. As difficult as it is, you've seen things that are more harrowing. Yeah. So kind of give yourself that perspective when you're going into these big interviews that we do important work, but it's not life and death.
Totally. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
When did you come the closest from like wanting to peace out from journalism as a career?
I wouldn't say I ever got really, really close, but I will say when I was working in the Kansas City Metro, I'd been there at that small community newspaper for a few years. I thought I was doing really great work, but I was just uncertain about the future and where it was going and how they were handling like transition to websites and paywalls and things like that. And I was feeling a little discouraged just about, hey, I was sending out clips and resumes and I'm not getting a lot of feedback back. It was a difficult time in journalism. I knew friends that had left the profession, and I was kind of felt like I was grinding and doing good work, but doing it sort of in obscurity for low pay, and that I didn't see a ton of light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. And at one point I was talking with the superintendent of one of the school districts I covered, and I was asking him some questions about an ongoing storyline there. And he kind of stopped me and was just kind of saying, would you be interested in working in PR or working in
like communications?
Yeah, would you be interested in being in communications for us? We're looking for someone. We really like you. We've seen your stories. We know that you can present yourself and handle yourself. And obviously, you know how the media works and what the media is looking for. And I was very flattered, and I thought about it for a second. I was like, man, I can only imagine what the pay differential might be. And I got to say, there was a time there where I thought, I don't know if I would have even gotten that job, or if he was just being nice, or, I didn't get that far down the path, but I did think pretty seriously about it for a few days, about reaching back out and just saying, like, is that real? Because if so, I do feel like I'm treading water here in a way that isn't additive or isn't propulsive for my career.
Yeah. So. I think it's good to question yourself always, right? And just like explore opportunities. But it's really interesting if like you really have a passion for a career, the pull back to that. Like even when I know journalism is not, you're not making millions. I mean, most people are not.
Yeah, you know? We're not doing it for the money.
You're not. You're doing it because you have a passion for the truth or for.
But you're doing it for some money.
Yeah, of course. Like you have to pay the bill. Let's be honest.
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm sure he wouldn't have said it to you if he didn't actually want to offer you the job. I'm sure.
Right. It seemed serious at the time. I could go back and call him and see what he thinks about that. But I think my initial reaction was like, oh, no way. I'm like super happy. And then I was like, wait, am I?
Yeah. Like, do I want that?
Yeah. Am I that happy? Yeah. And you have to have that kind of internal crisis briefly. And I ended up staying the path.
Good for you. Mm-hmm. What assignment made you laugh the hardest?
Oh, gosh. There's so many of them. I'll just point out one, which is sort of like maybe a weird one to laugh the hardest on. But when I was in Austin, there was Jamie Dimon, who's a very famous person. I don't know him very well, but I did get a chance to interview him.
Okay.
And he was doing kind of a barnstorming tour throughout Texas, and a lot of people were interviewing him, and he was doing one-on-ones with reporters. In our case, it was a gaggle, I think, with like one other reporter. Okay. There. But I showed up early, and I got to see some of the pomp and circumstance at that office in preparation for his arrival. And no joke, it's employees, presumably mandatory, lining up on either side of a hallway before he arrived. And there's people with like walkie-talkies, and they're essentially doing like, at a kid's soccer game where you do the
like
tunnel.
The tunnel? Okay.
They essentially did a tunnel, and they had like confetti, and this is how I remember it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe
you're exaggerating.
Maybe in history, there's a little bit, it's a slight exaggeration, but it was definitely a lot of setup, a lot of pomp and circumstances. They're on either side, they're cheering him on, he's running through and high-fiving it. And I remember I took a photo of him running through that, and I thought, this is so preposterous. I would never want anybody to do this for me. And I did sort of laugh about it internally, and we sat there for 10 minutes while he was meeting other people before we did our interview. And I did resolve myself that I was going to make that the cover story art.
Oh,
the art of the story was him running through and giving the high fives on that. And I just thought it kind of tickled my funny bone. And there's been other ones, but that one always stuck with me as, man, I bet you they thought that was a really good idea. And it kind of just struck me as patently ridiculous. He was a really fun interview, I will say, though. And he answered every question I asked, and I enjoyed getting to chat with him. But the setup to that was all pomp and circumstance, to the point where I couldn't help but laugh.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's just like, he might not even have been like, this is what I want, this is important to me. Like, his team might have put it together, and he probably maybe thought it was equally ridiculous, or maybe not. Famous people are weird.
He didn't give me the vibe that he was mortified by it.
Okay, yeah.
He seemed to like it. I don't want to put myself in his shoes.
Yeah.
I wonder what he might say in retrospect, but it was kind of a humorous moment.
I like it. Okay. Have you, and I know this is a yes, but I'm assuming you've witnessed something on the job that was pretty difficult to process emotionally. You just gave a really good example before about, a crime scene and kids.
Sure.
Is there another moment maybe where you almost couldn't do your job to its fullest, or it was a bigger struggle for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. When I was working in Kansas City and that role, and the more inner city area, there was just a lot of difficult things that would see, somebody who was obviously under the influence of drugs, like came into our office and was telling me this horror story about like networks of drug dealers and things that were causing all sorts of trouble throughout town. And you want to believe it, but you don't know. And I ended up giving the guy my sweatshirt because he was just like, I just felt like really bad about leaving, like talking to him for an hour and just being like, okay, well, go back to your whatever life you have. I'll think about this and maybe it'll be a story. And he obviously was an unreliable narrator. That's just a small one that comes to mind. One that really got me too was, you might remember in 2017, there was like a stop about resettlements and refugees, and there was some federal rules that were in place, and like it halted resettlement and refugee services in the U.S. like across the country. And the part of Kansas City I was working in was one of the central hubs for that. Hundreds of people every year were getting resettled into that community from all over the world. Somalia, a lot of places that were incredibly war torn. And there was this kind of national debate that I felt like wasn't very informed. I spoke with some folks that were working at that resettlement organization that was based in the part of Kansas City I was working. And they were just, almost in tears, talking about the people that, half the family is here now. The other half was supposed to come this week, but our funding was just paused and we can't. That one kind of stuck with me because one, I spoke to people that were going through it and they were saying, if the government won't help us in these circumstances, then who will? And people just, their lives were on the line in a way that wasn't captured in the national debate about this issue. And I found myself really moved. And it was a very difficult thing to see the people that had dedicated their lives to something that I feel like is incredibly noble and empathetic, in resettling refugees. And these people had obviously been through hell. And it was hearing their stories and talking to some individuals that were caught up in what was essentially a political issue. But it wasn't political to them. It was life and death.
It was
and
their life,
I just found myself really moved by all of that, and found the actual facts related to it to be, to change the way I thought about the issue.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm always curious when you feel a personal passion or pull to like a story like that. And I'm assuming it happens here even with development that's happening or something that gets you mad or excited. Is it hard for you to not take personal action? And the reason I asked, like Catherine Rieger was in here and she's on season 2. I'm really excited. And she talked about like the human side of housing, because she covers housing for the Republic or real estate. And she gets it really affects her. And she balances things sometimes by being like, I feel better writing about the $20 million home purchase because I can also write about these people who are during the pandemic, they were losing their housing or something like that. So, but you can't get involved personally as a journalist, really. So how does it affect you? Is it hard for you?
It can be difficult. I do feel like there's sort of writing about this stuff sometimes can be like an out of body experience in a weird way. Like you want to, you kind of separate your personal self from the journalist self as you're diving into this stuff. And it's the only way you can do it objectively, I feel like. Because in reality, day-to-day life, we all have opinions about everything. And we have spirited debates in our newsroom about issues. And, I think everyone it's a very open environment and welcoming for that kind of debate and that kind of discussion about topics of the day. But yeah, to your point, we do have to find a way to separate ourselves. And
you're human. So
we're only human. And I do think that there's a way to kind of thread that line, and I think most journalists learn how to do it, in their own ways. But obviously, the responsibility is ultimately to truth.
Yep, unbiased truth telling, right?
Yeah, but there's in that way, like it's not necessarily 50% goes to this side, 50% goes to that side in all our stories. It's like when I write about lawsuits and difficult litigation and things like that, what I'm always looking for is a judge's order. And it's not necessarily because the judge is the impartial party there. And so what they say to me is the most interesting. Like they're the person who are saying, yes, you can proceed. No, you can't. We're going to appoint a receiver to oversee this property, all these things, nitty gritty. But they're the unbiased third party there. And so that's the person I trust the most. Of
course.
It's not necessarily going in there and saying, here's the original complaint. Here's the response. They each get 50%. You have to find a way to bear out the truth. And that's, I think, you can use a judge's order to kind of give you a sense of which way the unbiased third party is thinking about something. So it's sort of the role that we play too.
That's a great perspective. What's the most impossible deadline that you somehow pulled off?
Oh man, there's been a lot of those ones. I do remember writing about when I was in Austin, I was covering a particularly difficult and complex issue that was going through the legislature, and I had essentially told my boss, I can do a cover story on this. We should. I wrote a story. They liked it. I said, I'm going to keep following this till the last day of the session. And I was going to the Capitol, and I was covering stuff, and I was talking to folks, and I was spending hours all day talking to these people. And things were just changing every single day. And they needed this story. I do recall, I think, staying up till about 4 a.m. on the day before deadline, and was, having been at a meeting the day before and essentially working through the night to try to get it all done. And I was proud of how that story came out. But sometimes you turn in the file and you kind of wonder, is this going to be horrible? Hopefully they'll be okay with this. And sometimes you get lucky in that you're able to, subconsciously sort of stream together elements of the story where you almost don't realize you're doing it if you get into a flow state. I like to say there's really no better motivation than this incredible pressure diamond creating hard and fast deadline.
Yes.
And somehow I found in my career that that's when I'm able to turn things around and surprise myself at, oh, these elements are suddenly coming together in a way I wasn't expecting, or I wasn't sure they would.
Yeah.
And that particular story was about a housing bill that was going through, and there was a million twists and turns, and it actually ended up with an incredible switcheroo at the 11th hour, which made it an incredibly compelling story. So I just felt lucky to be a part of it, and I stayed up almost all night getting that story done.
That's awesome. I feel like you've done that a lot of times. That was probably one very small example of that.
Sure.
Especially like with you're producing at the Business Journal, you have it's a weekly print, but it's every day.
Yeah.
It's a daily publication. And it's like there's probably stuff coming in, every minute that could be hotter than the next story. And so it's like deciding and deadlines and assigning and helping your staff. And is that your job really right now? Like you are writing stories, but you're really guiding everything, correct?
I don't want to give myself too much credit with that. I do think that's definitely a part of the role. I mean, I like to get into the weeds on stuff. It's not uncommon for me. Like if I have time today, I'm going to go to the courthouse and pull documents, Yeah,
that's a good point. It's a great point. I didn't plan this question, but I'm so curious. Like, what is the biggest threat to journalism today in your perspective?
I mean, the biggest thing we talk about is how we interact with AI.
Yeah.
How AI interacts with our content. Seeing a story that you've written that's behind a paywall that you put weeks into, pretty much laid out in full on. I was going to name some of the things.
AI platform.
Yes,
basically.
and generative AI platform. I won't be naming names, I guess. But yeah, just when you see your story essentially that has been scraped and thrown on, you can find it on a prompt.
That's hard.
It's tough. I do think that's the biggest thing on a high level news organizations need to grapple with, because if they're not, we're going to be left in the dust.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the most powerful thing that is to your benefit with AI and all that's happening is these platforms, like businesses want to come up, in top searches, in AI, and it's third-party validation that gets them there. So they need to be in the news, and they need to be published by credible, valid sources. And so that, I think, is an opportunity. Like, I like to look for what's the light. And if you can find a way to, like, monetize that, there's something there.
Yeah, it's good to hear you say that. I've been called a cynical optimist. So, like, I'm pretty deeply cynical when it comes to, like, vetting stories.
Isn't that just a realist?
That's kind of what you have to do. You're like, okay, well, what's their motivation? Where's this coming from?
Yeah.
But I feel like day to day, I'm a pretty optimistic guy.
Yeah.
And I try to bring that with me wherever I go. And I do find that that's important. Like, you want to be around people that are optimistic and that have that light.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, if I'm just poo-pooing every idea that comes through, then nobody wants to be around a person like that. But I think you're right that there's some positives there. I think the more of this AI slop that's out in the ether, the more people will be gravitating towards people that they can trust.
Exactly.
Outlets that they can trust. And so that gives me a little hope. And there might be a time where people are just saying, okay, I get it. There's a lot of use cases for this stuff, but like, can we just focus on the news and actually have that be can that be sacrosanct in some way?
Yeah.
I don't know if people will ever get there, but that's my hope that eventually people will say, man, there's a lot of crap out there, and I could read 20 ags of somebody else's work. But what I really want to see is what's the original reporting. And maybe you want to hear directly from the reporter if we need to be a little bit better about how we embed video or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think that's one thing that's keeping a lot of people up at night.
For sure. In all industries, but especially in news. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What side of you never shows up in your work but defines you?
I don't know if this is true or not, but I sort of have this idea in my head that when people think of me, they will think of me as being funny.
Yeah.
And I think that's like probably somewhat universal. Like a lot of people want to believe that they are funny.
Yeah.
And I don't, and sometimes you try to sneak it into your stuff in small ways or in an anecdotal lead or in a headline or a tease or something like that. But I hope that that's true. I hope that people think, hey, he's competent, of course, but I think I would even rather have funny than competent. So maybe that's I'm showing you a little bit of how I think about the world and how I think about myself in it. I would prefer to be additive in very small ways in my life. So either, if you can't have a small positive impact, then no impact would be okay. But I'd hate the idea of having a negative impact on anybody's life. Yeah. So that's one thing I try to strive for. Yeah. But, ultimately, I want to make people laugh. And, I do have a little bit of like a class clown sort of hidden inside me that I'm sure people on our team see when it comes out in our meetings and things like that, but not necessarily showing up in a business journal.
Yeah. It's not going to show up in your stories maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's an important quality. Also, it's disarming for when you do interviews too. If you can find a way, especially serious things, I think I always tell my clients, like, of course, everything's on the record when they're doing an interview, but it's like, just be human. Yeah. Just be comfortable, because when you're comfortable, you do better and you tell the truth. And, and I think if you can disarm people who are always uncomfortable talking to you,
sure, most of the
with
time
a little bit of humor, that is a great quality.
I love riffing for a few minutes at the beginning of the interview, especially if it's someone you haven't met.
Yes. We kind of did it here.
We were just riffing.
We know each other, but we never met in person.
Right. And just like having that little bit of made me feel more comfortable. Yep. Having a little riff session before we get started. And it makes people feel like, okay, this is a real person. There's this sort of thing with journalism where big journalism just feels like it's something that doesn't have a face.
It's so corporate and just there and like it's nameless.
And then people get on the call and they're like, what can I say? What can't I say? Just FYI, this needs to be off the record. And really, 95% of our conversations don't really need to be off the record, but people just are they're gun shy. They don't want to be quoted. Of all the people that will say, and there's an epidemic going on in journalism, which hopefully we can talk to. I'll look right at the camera. Yeah. No, but just that people saying, oh, can I see the quotes before they're published? And will you show me the quotes? I just don't. I'm like, no, I won't show you.
I always tell my clients, just so you know, I'm like, they don't do that.
Yeah, they don't do that.
And that's an education thing. It's like that. It's your job to pull from the interview the what you think is valid and credible and important to be in the story. And most reporters are really good about asking, like, is this correct? Like verifying if they're unsure. Yeah. But you can't run the quotes by. You can't show us the full story.
Can I read the story before it's published? It's like, I don't know who told you that that's okay. And some people will say, like, some people do that. I want you to ask for their names, who is doing that, because I don't feel like it's true.
It's not true.
And I hope it's not true.
It's not true. I mean, I've been doing PR for 20 years, and unless it was like a advertorial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe that is like people confusing
advertising.
Advertising and earned media. Exactly. But, earned media, it literally has to be earned. Like, it has to be.
There's a reason you're in the press. You earned the spot to be the expert or to be talked about. Yeah. And
one thing I don't mind doing, of course, like I'll talk to someone. I'll agree to off the record if I really need to just get some context about something. Mm-hmm. But I'm also not afraid at the end of that conversation to say, like, hey, you said 2 or 3 things that I thought were really interesting, and would work out really well in the story, and don't put you in any sort of don't give you any sort of exposure to legal things.
Can I source you?
Can we circle back to that on the record? And if you have like an uplifting, promising, whatever it is, like if you have a positive conversation with someone and they get a chance to know you a little better, I found that more often than not, people will say, yeah, that's fine.
Almost always.
And if they say no, that's okay too. Like that was what we agreed to after all. So I can't be upset about that.
No, you can't. But that's a great perspective to have. And again, using humor to make people comfortable and open up to you, that's a skill. You know? So, and that's important for you to get people to want to open up to you.
Right. Yeah. But you got to be careful about the duds.
I know. Yeah. So now you just say the first thing that comes to mind. If there's a story with it, I love to hear it. Okay? All right. What's your go-to comfort food, drink, or ritual when the pressure's on?
I'll tell you what I started getting into was yerba mate.
Oh, what's
It's
that?
like caffeinated tea-like drinks.
Yeah.
There's a company called Clean Cause, which I'll promote on your podcast right now, and in Austin that makes them, and they're just like, it's a guilty pleasure. Like they give you a little energy. It's an alternative to coffee. Maybe if I'm feeling a little, less than pep in the afternoon, I'll have one and it'll help get me over the hump. So
Nice.
I do like those.
Your secret journalistic superpower.
Maybe what I just described before, but also just, I think being able to put myself in their perspective, in somebody's perspective, and have empathy, and maybe to a lesser degree, just realizing that there's nothing as simple as a superpower that's going to solve all your problems.
No.
It's going to put you over the top. It's a composite of a bunch of different traits, but trying to be able to disarm them with humor, being able to be empathetic and putting yourself in their shoes and ask really good questions. Like, obviously we should be prepping a lot for these interviews.
Yes.
And if I can't tell you how many times I've gotten done with an interview and someone saying it's like such a relief and a delight, even at times, to talk to someone who's done their homework. Or I've read the 30-page legal document, and they're so used to talking with reporters that don't.
Of course.
And they'll say, just catch me up on whatever the storyline is. And gosh, I think sources really hate that.
They do. Well, it's annoying because you put in, that's your job, they think. And I think there's a big difference between what the kind of reporting you do and maybe what a broadcaster does.
Right.
Because they're great. And I have, someone on here next who's a broadcaster, but they move so fast and differently that oftentimes if I am preparing a segment sheet for a broadcast interview, let's say, it's almost 90% of the time the reporter's never read it. The producer has, and the producer okayed it, but like the reporter's doing the interview.
Right.
So they don't have the background. And that's hard for a client to sit there and be like, do they not know anything about this?
Well, do I start from scratch? And like, how elementary does this conversation need to be? And I think just being able to meet them where they're at and asking specific questions about things you found in the documents, or saying, oh, look, there was this, one of the exhibits was this exchange of emails. That, like, well, that's on page 37 of 42, and the fact that, these lawyers and people that are sources for you when you're writing these complicated stories, just very much appreciate the fact that not only are you not asking them to just build your story from the ground up, but you've got specific questions related to things that are in the filings. And even if it's something that is, they might see as combative, hey, I notice that the other side of the case is saying X, Y, Z. It stands in direct contrast to what you say. At least you're asking them a question based on something that's objective and something that's in the filings that they can, that's tangible.
Yep. Great point. What's the first concert you went to?
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I went and saw him live in Kansas City at the former Sandstone Amphitheater. If there's any KC heads here, I think it's changed names multiple times since. But that was the first proper concert I saw outside of like Blues Fest and things like family-friendly stuff, where I went with my friends to go see a show, and it was great.
Gosh, Tom Petty, that would have been a great first concert.
Yeah, it was really cool. So,
Good one.
R.I.P.
Story or assignment you'd cover if there were no rules and no budget limits?
I've always wanted to cover a World Cup or an Olympics.
Okay, well.
And I'm not really on that path right now, but if anybody wants to send me to any of the, now I'm looking again. If anybody wants to send me to cover a World Cup or an Olympics, I'll do an amazing job and I'll give you that business lens. But yeah, I've always wanted to do that because I just find like that bringing so many people together from all walks of life, it's just so compelling, and there's a million different stories. And having done some of like high school sports and stuff, and I always kind of scratch my itch to put a spotlight on these kids that were super appreciative of them. And I think it would just be a lot of fun.
Love it. Okay, we're going to find that opportunity for you. Maybe when it comes to LA, there's some economic impact of the Valley with the Olympics. I don't know.
No, we'll just make something up.
We'll make it up. Fine. Okay, good. Okay, advice you'd give to someone starting in your career today?
One, like make sure you want it and be all in if you're going to do it. And two, like just come in eyes wide open and embrace it and be willing to do what I described before. Like if you're not getting into journalism to chase difficult stories, to find something that's complicated or difficult or seems hairy or just, out of control or just hard to wrap your head around, then I feel like you're doing it wrong. Like you have to have a passion for uncovering really compelling and interesting and complicated stories. And if you have that, then you'll do well. Yeah. If you have that kind of, if you're driven in that way, I would hire anybody who has that kind of like competitive spirit and is willing to chase difficult things and spend the time and effort it takes to wrap their head around it. Yeah. That's the kind of thing you can't teach. I can teach, how to write a lead or how to do a nut graph or the basics about using our CMS, but it's hard to teach like that natural ingrained sort of like drive to chase difficult things and not be afraid of them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And remember that if you need a job, he's going to train. He's willing to train you. You just got to have the right, core human qualities that make you a good journalist. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you.